Hey everyone, long time with no Agatha Christie reviews, but I'm finally back for another one. I actually have been reading more Hercule Poirot books, but it just never got around to reviewing them, so you can expect another 2 reviews coming soon. This one, The Hollow, is one that I read a while ago, took some notes, and never quite pieced together my review, but I did take enough notes to remember my main thoughts, so here goes. As always, I'll hold off on spoilers until the second half of the review, and I'll let you know when those are coming. The Hollow comes right after Five Little Pigs in the Poirot chronology, and I reviewed that one on my channel as well. This novel is another country house mystery, not so different from Five Little Pigs, but in many other regards it's fairly different. So in this novel, the charismatic Lady Anquetel has invited several family guests for a weekend getaway, including Detective Hercule Poirot and murder victim John Christie. I had to think for a second whether we knew who it was that would be killed, and the answer is yes, it's clear almost immediately, although it then takes a while for the murder to actually happen. I enjoyed this novel. It wasn't among the best of the best Christie novels I've read, but neither was it among the worst. One big point in its favor is that the characters in this novel, for the most part, go well beyond the level of interest of our normal Poirot characters. Thus, some reviews I've seen, such as the one by Mara from the channel Books Like Woe, have said that this novel works better as an actual novel than as a murder mystery. And I somewhat agree with that. I found the murder mystery mostly average among Poirot novels. I mean, it wasn't the best I've ever read, and the solution wasn't quite as satisfying as I might have liked, but there were a lot of interesting aspects, enough to keep me interested until the very end, and it never reached a point where I was just saying, give me a break, as has happened in some of my least favorite Poirot novels, and also, unfortunately, in the murder plots of the next 2 novels in the series that I'll be talking about. So The Hollow places a deeper emphasis on character development than a typical Poirot novel, allowing them to reach fuller dimensions than most of the cartoonish characters we see from Christie, and therefore making them more sympathetic to the reader. And part of that is also that the characters in the novel have their flaws, but there's also much to be appreciated in all of them. And I think most readers will find that they like at least some of the characters in spite of those flaws, or maybe even more so because of them. I guess I can say which ones I personally liked. I mean, this is going to be without considering the last third of the book, so let's just say that to keep it spoiler-free. But just considering everything up to this point, how they played as characters. I especially liked Henrietta and Lady Anquetel. Lady Anquetel is a bit much at times, an energetic personality, always 2 steps ahead of everyone, and sometimes meddling in things that she probably has no business being involved in. Henrietta is an artist, and a bit of a modern woman personality, at least in terms of spirit. Very clever and also understands other people on a fairly deep level. Some readers have commented it's pretty clear from Christie's writing that she herself seems to quite like Henrietta. I can't remember if I noticed this at the time, but in hindsight I can definitely see it. Along with all this deeper character involvement, though, comes the trade-off of seeing much less of Poirot himself. Poirot is more of a side character in this novel, which I didn't mind at all, but which contrasts sharply with a novel like the prior Five Little Pigs, or the one I'll be reviewing soon, Mrs. McGinty's Dead. I think this is a good change of pace, as throughout the Poirot series, Poirot tends to be involved in different ways and seen through different lenses, which keeps things interesting. And since Poirot's investigations often really steal the show, his place on the periphery in this novel really gives the other characters more space to breathe and come to life. I found the mystery pretty interesting in this one, with enough interesting clues for me to develop some theories, but not so many clues as to overwhelm me and just make me give up. In the end, the solution was not one of my favorites I've ever read, but it was still pretty satisfying. It at least reached some minimum bar so as not to annoy me or anything. So before I get into spoilers and talk a little bit more about the mystery itself, I'll just say I enjoyed this novel and would probably place it a little above the middle in ranking of Poirot's adventures I've read so far. But now I'm going to get into spoilers, so you're warned. Come back later if you don't want to hear about the dirty details right now. Alright, so what interesting elements did this novel's mystery introduce? Well, the first point that stands out is that Poirot reflects himself that the murder scene almost looks to have been staged. Things seem a bit dramatic too, a bit too perfect, if you can use that word to describe a murder, leading Poirot to wonder if one or more people might have dressed up the scene to shield someone from guilt or something like that. This fanciful aspect to the murder casts some suspicion in my mind among the creative, fanciful Lady Anquetel, who certainly had the wherewithal to orchestrate a murder. The motive for Mrs. Anquetel was a little less clear. I assumed if it were her, it must have to do with trying to set up one of her family members to achieve a more favorable marriage, but it wasn't clear how killing John Christie would really work in her favor here. It seems like it would be a bit much, but perhaps it could have some unknown involvement with inheritance. Another interesting aspect is that there was at least one very obvious cover-up going on here, which is that Henrietta picks up the murder weapon and accidentally on purpose drops it in the pool, not only placing her own fingerprints on it, but also probably making any attempt at gathering fingerprints at all from this weapon to be completely worthless. And with someone as shrewd as Henrietta, the immediate gut reaction here is that Henrietta is covering for herself, although we quickly begin to have doubts about that too, considering other possibilities. So while this doesn't give us hard evidence incriminating any particular character, it instead clues us in further that there's something about this scene that is orchestrated. Still another interesting aspect of the murder scene is John's dying word. Why does he say Henrietta's name as the life is leaving him? Poirot correctly recognizes that it's not simply a statement of who the murderer is, making it very clear to us readers that it must be something else. I correctly recognize that the statement must be an appeal to Henrietta to do something. However, in my mind, I figured it must have to do with John's medical practice, perhaps begging her to help his current patient or something like that, since, after all, he was intensely devoted to his work and had told her all about it. He probably cared about it more than he cared about her. The reality, of course, is that this utterance was not just loosely related to our case, but rather something much more germane to the murder plot itself, a plea for Henrietta to protect the murderer. In the end, one minor disappointment for me was that the actual murderer turned out to be one of the least interesting characters it could have been. Gerda wasn't particularly memorable as a character and didn't come to life nearly as much as Henrietta, Lady Agatha, or the murdered man himself, John Christie. Thus, it was a little bit harder for me as a reader to feel the other characters' devotion to Gerda, to feel their impulses to shield the vulnerable, timid Gerda from the consequences of her crime. And then this notion of Gerda as vulnerable and mostly innocent, as almost more of a cornered victim than a perpetrator, is belied by the final action in her life, her attempt to poison someone who we know was only trying to help her. But I guess this sort of serves its purpose too, to make us question whether Gerda was really as fundamentally innocent as everyone around her seemed to believe. There were a few other slight missteps with the character development in my opinion, one of those being the Edward and Midge plot. It was a bit much for me, mostly uncompelling emotionally, which is why Christie had to resort to using Edward's attempted suicide to get readers to care more and just to pique our suspicions for just 1 minute that this could possibly be related to the murder plot. All of this, though, mostly just distracted from more interesting stuff that was going on by this point in the novel. I respect Christie for trying to create more compelling characters, but it here didn't work quite well enough for me to really applaud it. I think it would have been more effective if it was less abrupt and we'd really gotten more insight earlier into Edward's character and psychology, or some further hints about just how desperate he was becoming. But still, all in all, the characters in The Hollow were more interesting and relatable than in almost any Poirot novel out there. Definitely the best since Sad Cypress, and maybe better than the characters there. The mystery itself was fairly ordinary as they go, but I think that's not such a bad thing, and it has its unique elements. The crime investigation itself is pretty interesting, and we do get this classic part that I love about midway through the novel, where Poirot goes around and basically establishes for each and every one of the characters that he's already thinking about exactly what you, the reader, were thinking of. I love this kind of device when Christie uses it because it's essentially a way to congratulate us readers midway through the book, give us a pat on the back and to say, good job, you're thinking about the right things, but here's why that solution doesn't work, so start over from the beginning. When used perfectly, it gives us a little feeling of satisfaction, but not too much satisfaction, keeping us invested for the second half of the novel to see what really happened. And as far as what really did happen in The Hollow, well, it was certainly difficult, but not too far-fetched. I do think this one was probably solvable, even if maybe a bit of guesswork was involved. Not that I solved it myself, but it was one that I could at least accept as plausible when it was all revealed by the end. So The Hollow was a solid mystery plot, at least average for Christie, but also well above average in the story and character development. Nothing about the setting or murder details is too amazingly different, but there's enough to make it feel like a unique case and one that's memorable for a long time after reading. Among the Poirot novels I've read, I'd certainly place this one in the top half. I probably enjoyed it better than, let's say, 2/3 of the other Poirot novels I've read. There's more Poirot to talk about coming soon, as I've already finished Taken at the Flood and Mrs. McGinty's Dead, so I'm excited to post those reviews pretty soon too. But until then, happy reading.